Hi, and welcome back for another edition of Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the people that bring them to you. I'm going to be your host this evening, Jim Nettles. And before we get started, let's make our way around the room and let everybody know who is adding to that to be read pile. So, Len, let's have you go first since you're a first-time author.
Sure. I'm Len Berry. I come from Southeast Missouri. I've been here a long time. And I write things like dark fantasy and science fiction, only I can't do it the normal way. So I start blending together ideas I get from video games and Red Panda videos.
Joelle.
Hi, I'm JD Blackrose, or Joelle, either works. I have been writing a trilogy, and the third one is just about to come out from Bellbridge Books. The first one is Demon Kiss, the second one is Fae Crossed, and the third one that's coming out at the end of May is Hellbound.
Isabelle?
Hello, my name is Isabelle Hardesty. I write young adult fantasy. My most recent book is Midnight in Bellefleur, which is second of a trilogy coming, but the last book's coming out later this year. And the most recent book is Midnight in Bellefleur.
Mark?
Well, my name is Mark West. I'm a professor and teach children's literature and other topics at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. April was a good month for me, so I had 2 books come out in just the last couple of weeks, and they couldn't be more different. So one of them is a scholarly book called Theodore Roosevelt and His Library at Sycamore Hill. And the other one is a children's book. It's my first actual children's book, even though I teach children's literature, collection of poems. And it's called The Peeve and The Grudge and Other Preposterous Poems.
That's what happens when you teach children's literature.
That's awesome.
Glenn.
So I'm Glenn Parris. I'm a rheumatologist by day. I'm a liar by night. I write mysteries. I write fantasy, vampire lore. I do some action comic short stories, and I have a science fiction novel that actually drops tomorrow. We are having I'll save the rest of it for later on.
Alex?
Hi, my name is Alex Segura. I'm a writer of crime novels, science fiction novels, and comic books. My new book, Secret Identity, is a comic book murder mystery set in 1975 New York. Came out in March from Flatiron Books.
And Janet.
Hi, I'm Janet Walden-West. I write urban fantasy and paranormal romance. My latest project is the Region 2 Urban Fantasy series, and the third book in it came out April 30th.
So JD, we're going to start with you since you've been down this rodeo a few times. And this is the third book in the series. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this release?
Okay, so Hellbound picks up immediately after the events in the second book, Fae Crossed. So the 3 books feature a woman named Bex, Rebecca called Bex, and she is a summoner born, meaning that when she was 13, a little mark called the Kiss appeared on her left wrist, and it marked her as one of the few people who can do what she does, which is summon immortals and other beings of power. She can summon them, sort of just sit there and have a talk with them, and they can't hurt her. They can't really do anything to her, but as we find out, they can hurt other people. And when we first meet her in book 1, she's hiding out in a Fae bar, bartending, hiding from a demon because a summoning had gone terribly wrong. A demon summoning had gone terribly wrong, and now she owed the demon a favor. By the time we get to Hellbound, hijinks have ensued, many of them. And she is, as the title tells you, on her way to hell to take care of business. And that's where this book takes us.
How about you, Isabelle?
Oh, well, book 2 in the Destroyer Witch Chronicles starts off with Juliet sitting in a diner, which is where book 1 ended. And she's dealing with the fact that this spell that she tried to solve all of her problems with didn't work out. So the council knows that, is about to find out that magic has been done in public. So she needs to get things right. And in walks a mysterious witch who's going to help Juliet, but she finds out that there are lots of strings attached, and chaos ensues as well in this second book. And things get upturned, and Juliet finds out that there's so much more to herself than she knew from before. And a lot of what she's used to disappears, but other things appear. So it was a fun book to write, and it came out 10 days ago.
Mark, so let's find out about both of these tomes.
Okay, so I'll start off with the Roosevelt book. I am pleased to brag that this book was #1 on Amazon's new releases in the library and information sciences category yesterday, all day yesterday. It's now dropped to 5. So I'm complaining, but I was pleased to see that. This book grew out of a trip that I took to Sagamore Hill, where Theodore Roosevelt lived for much of his life. He was an avid reader. He read a book a day. He literally read a book a day, and then he had these other measly jobs like president. But his reading was very, very important to him. He knew many, many authors. He drew on his reading and his decision-making, and his library still exists. His papers have been scattered hither and yon, but his library still exists at Sycamore Hill. So I was able, using some attempts at charm, to convince the people at Sagamore Hill to grant me access to the library. And so much of this book is actually a bibliography of all the books that currently exist in Theodore Roosevelt's library, which in and of itself is interesting, but it also tells you a little bit about what books Theodore Roosevelt read, what his interests were, and how those books came into play with the decisions that he made as president and in other positions that he had. So it was a lot of fun. I really feel like I know Roosevelt. I feel like when you look at somebody's books, like I see some of you have books in your backdrop, I'm a Snoopy person, and I always look at people's books because I feel like you can get a sense of who somebody is by looking at their books, especially if it's not just wallpaper. If they've actually read the books, you can learn a lot about people from their books. The other book is a children's book, and it's all based on words. It's written, almost all the poems are written from the voice of a child, and they're about words and phrases that children that I've known have misinterpreted or come up with another interpretation. So like the peeve and the grudge. Well, the peeve, for example, came from when I used to be a preschool teacher many, many years ago. A little girl came up to me, she was about 4, and she said, Mr. West, what's a peeve? Is it a fish? And I said, a fish? Yeah, she said, my mom says she has a new pet peeve and we just got an aquarium. So I wondered, is a peeve a fish? And I said, no, it's not. And I tried to explain to her. She said, oh, she didn't like that at all. She said, well, I'm going to call the fish peeve anyway. And so these are all about poems in which kids misinterpret words or come up with new definitions or new pronunciations. And I had a lot of fun with it.
Mr. Parris, sir.
Hello there. So my new book is called Dragon's Heir, The Iflu Legacy. And it starts with a conspiracy that brings our point of view character, Vitna, the archaeologist, back to a primitive world where the people are evolved from mammals. And they don't realize that they are a small anthill in the backyard of these incredibly powerful people and don't know how to stay out of trouble. It's a lot of fun because I thought that we've seen enough dinosaur movies where the dinosaurs are the wildlife of their time, and about time we meet the people. And they are disturbingly like us. We're going to see the best of us, and we're going to see the worst of us in the Iflu. And a lot of the challenges that they bounce up against are going to reflect a lot on, who we are as a people and where we've been, and how certain mistakes get repeated no matter who finds themselves in those situations. So it's a lot of interesting allegory, but it's got space opera, it's got conspiracy, it's got romance, it's got, and I'm going to say it, it's not the F-bomb, but it's a cosmic pandemic. it's got cyborg bears, it's got captives, and a lot of interesting things in it, I think. But it's a lot of fun to read, and I think that it will make people think as they read it, which is what my goal always is.
How about you, Alex? What are you bringing for everybody's to be read pile?
My submission, I guess, is Secret Identity, which is my noir comic book murder mystery. It's set in 1975 New York. The protagonist is a queer Cuban-American woman named Carmen Valdez, who moves from Miami, her hometown, my hometown too, to work in comics in New York. She gets a job as a secretary at this kind of a third-rate publisher, not Marvel or DC, called Triumph Comics. And tries to get a chance to write some of their comics, but her boss basically says it's not going to happen. She talks to a colleague, a junior colleague named Harvey, who basically says, I've got this opportunity to write a new female superhero for the company, but I don't have any ideas. Would you write it with me anonymously? She's very sharp. She sees all the landmines and the potential pitfalls that come with that, but she does it anyway. It's her dream. And they create a character called the Legendary Lynx, except nobody knows that Carmen's involved, and it becomes a huge hit, the best-selling title of the Triumph stable. And at the same time, her colleague Harvey is murdered. So the only person that knows she had anything to do with the character or the creation of the character is dead. And she has to investigate his murder to not only find out what happened to her friend, but also to reclaim this idea that she's held close since she was a kid reading comics. You know, she's been jotting down ideas and scripts. And throughout the novel, there are actual comic book sequences. So as you read the novel and you read what Carmen's doing, you can see some of the comics about the Lynx, the character that she created. So it's been out since it came out in March from Flatiron, and yeah, that's it.
Janet? You're on mute.
Sorry, guys. My book is Agent of Chaos. It is the third installment of the Region 2 series, which is urban fantasy. And the storyline follows a team of monster hunters, basically, who have to learn to interact with civilians, something that they have no experience with. And there's no magic in this world. All of the cryptids, the monsters, are part of your natural flora and fauna. They're just incredibly dangerous. And with this one, we follow the lieutenant on the team, Liv, as a lot of suspicion has fallen on her team in the first two books, since cryptid behavior has changed. They're acting erratically. There are secrets about their company that are coming out that seemingly couldn't come from anywhere but the team or someone highly placed in the organization. So she has to learn to interact with civilians and integrate a civilian that she kind of stumbles over in the very first chapter as she's killing the vampires that have taken over his hotel. So.
How about you, Len? What is it you're bringing to us?
Ooh, I'm bringing Scars of Shadow. It's my brainchild of watching way too many, sci-fi movies and way too many dark fantasy video games. It features a cursed witch. Her name is Serena, and she dies but can't stay dead. And every time she comes back, she's a little bit closer to crazy, and she's not the only one that has this particular ailment. So she's not a popular person to begin with, and she's wandering through everywhere trying to find a way to fix it, cure it, help others. And she encounters a city that's surrounded by a living, bleeding wall, and it is full of all sorts of extra horrible monstrosities. And now she gets to fight them too.
So diving in, and let's talk a little bit more about the worlds that people are going to discover when they're walking into them. So when we look at stories, one thing we always want to know as a reader is kind of what's the story behind it. What inspired it, what led into it, what really fed the imagination to create the world and to create the characters we're dealing with. So Isabel, how about you? What built this series? I know that you said this is the second book. So what brought this series and this world about?
Like Alex, I'm originally from Miami, so that's nice to see a fellow Miami, and I don't meet them very much. I'm now living in Seattle area, so basically the other side of the country. I started the book when I was living in Georgia, just thinking about the whole South Florida feeling of the nature, the heat, the humidity, the mosquitoes. So I started the series off in the fictitious town called Bellefleur, which is basically 45 minutes from Miami. And she's in the swamp behind Victor, her best friend, BFF, hunky best friend. So book 2 continues, but the world is very steeped into this natural Cuban, Haitian, Dominican reality. And her aunt has a diner, and that's a part of the story. And Juliet's a telenovela actress turned witch, which is very Miami, and it's pretty insane. I love it. I just wanted to. It's basically a love letter to Miami.
So Mark, looking at finally bringing out the collection of poems and the inspiration, because I mean, kids can provide great inspiration for a lot of things, both, fun characters as well as sometimes a little bit horrific, especially if you're a middle school teacher. But, looking at things like that, what was it that finally brought you over the edge to bring this collection of stories out, or the collection of poems?
By accident. So I've been writing these poems off and on for quite a while with no intention of ever doing anything with them. They would just pop into my head and I would work on them. And I care a lot about rhythm of language, and they're carefully constructed poems, even though my intention is to be funny. And I write a poem. Now, I used to be the chair of the English department for a long time. And there was a woman, she's still around, who one of her jobs was to try to make me look like I knew what I was doing. So I would occasionally write one of these poems, and I'd come into her office. I'd say, "Angie, I've got a new poem," and I'd read it to her, and she'd say, "Oh, that's very funny," or whatever she'd say, and I put it in a file, and then I'd forget about it. And then 6 months later, another poem would pop into my head, and I'd write down, I put it in a file. She knew where that file was. So I was invited to give a talk at Oxford, and I flew off to Oxford for a week. And while I was gone, she took those poems and she typed them all up, because most of them were just handwritten. I wasn't planning to make a book. It was just having a little fun. And she typed them all up and made them look all nice and official. And then I said, "My goodness, this sort of looks like a book." And then I happened to run into an editor at an event, and she said, "Oh, well, we're interested in children's poetry. Can we see it?" And I said, "Well, it just so happens they're all typed up now. So sure, you can see it." She said, "Oh, we love this." And so it just happened. But it's doing really pretty well. There's both a paperback and a hardback edition. And I'm pleased with it. And I'm grateful. I referred to that woman, Angie Williams is her name, as the godmother of the book, because if it wasn't for her, I would have never turned it into a book. So.
See, there's always somebody behind every writer that makes us do the crazy things we do. So Glenn, how about you? What brought your world about? What was really the big inspiration? What are we going to find when we dive into it deeper?
Well, the original acorn that raised this tree was a documentary that I saw about 30 years ago. I remember the archaeologist Bob Bacher was describing the process of finding fossils. And he said, everything that we know about dinosaurs is based on 3% of the fossil record. And I remember being just stunned by that. 3%, we don't know anything. Maybe the dinosaurs didn't even die out. Maybe they just left. And that was the kernel that just started rolling and got the book going. And my point of view was of course, a beautiful aristocrat who has what we would normally call a very admirable job. She's an archaeologist, but in her culture, it's a useless profession because they have very detailed, intricate records that go back, over 70 million years. So what purpose is an archaeologist except to be an indulgent profession, sort of like calligraphy in the age of digital graphics. All right. I mean, it's nice to do, but it's kind of useless, and I'm sure that there are people who would argue with me about that, but you can't really make a living doing calligraphy these days. So she's an accidental passenger on this urgent mission to find untainted algae is what they're looking for. And they're going back on this path. They can't find it anywhere in their realm. And they're going back on the path towards their planet of origin. And they expect to find a barren world. And instead, they find this verdant world that is teeming with life, but the place is infested with mammals that have evolved to look like them. And it's a mystery that none of them can resist, try as they might. So they left one species behind, and we know that species is dragons, and the dragons are nowhere to be found. So the question is, are we artificially engineered, in which case we are toys, we have no rights, and we can be wiped out? Or did we naturally evolve, which would be a nightmare for them? Talk about post-apocalyptic nightmares. If we naturally evolved, by law, they will have to invite us into their society, bring us up to speed in terms of technology, wealth, transportation, resources. And they really, with a deep-seated passion, don't want to do that. And it's a reflection of a lot of what the human experience has been over the past 10 or 20,000 years. It's exploitation, it's imperialism, it's benign neglect, above all other things. And it's the arrogance of never having been defeated, coming up against, it's that immovable object coming up against the irresistible force kind of thing. Except we think we're an irresistible force, and we find out otherwise. One of those two characters is wrong. I think that the final of this that you see, and it actually begins at the end. Vitna, who is captured, has to be our advocate, our mouthpiece, our lawyer, if you will, in a court that we can't even participate in. And after being put through all the things that she's put through, you really have to scratch your head. It's like, okay, she's defending us, we're doomed. So I hope everybody enjoys it. In the vein of Frank Herbert, I wanted to put a glossary in that helps you with a lot of the terms that we otherwise wouldn't be privy to. And that's called the Jing Pen translated. It comes from their word for mammals, or Jing. Jing Pen denotes a mammal that's been genetically engineered, because they don't believe that we could have possibly evolved on our own. And it's a lot like the ancient alien fanatics who feel that anything that they can't explain must have been given to us by aliens.
Well, I'm still on, the fact that, all of these humans are still in infestation. So all these mammals. So Alex, what was your inspiration behind this one?
For me, I've worked in comics for almost 20 years as a marketing person and as a writer and editor. And so when I was finishing up my PI series, which was set in Miami and featured a Cuban American detective, I was thinking about what to do next. And I really love the kind of mysteries that really transport you into different places, different industries, like Megan Abbott's books or Patricia Highsmith, things that are very character driven, but not necessarily private eye or a cop procedural. Police procedural. And the idea of setting it in comics really intrigued me, but I wanted to do it in a time that was in stark contrast to the comic book industry today. Comics are everywhere now. There's a Moon Knight show. We just saw another Doctor Strange movie, so it's really a big part of pop culture. But there was a time where comics were failing, before comic shops, before the Comic-Cons kicked into high gear, and before people really saw, comics as a way to monetize IP, where you create something and hopefully it becomes a movie or a TV show and you can become wealthy. It was a job, it was a trade, and it was something that people did either as a means to get to do something else, or if you were a super fan like the protagonist of Secret Identity, you did it for the love of the medium. And I was really inspired by books like Cavalier and Clay, which one thing that Chabon did really well is it's got this great sense of verisimilitude. You just feel like it could have happened. He weaves it through actual history so thoughtfully. And in Secret Identity, you see nods and mentions to actual people. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Carmen goes to a comic convention. She interacts with other people that were alive and working in comics at the time. And it feels, I hope, it feels like something that could have happened. And those sequences from the comic book, the idea was to give people a sense of, wow, this comic could have come out in 1975, and it feels very much of the time. And so the artist evoked the style of the era. Sandy Jarrell, who's fantastic, really evoked the style of the comics coming out around that time. So the hope is that the comic sequences and the prose are in meta conversation, that it's not just this perfunctory thing I added for fun. Like, you have to read both to really get a full sense of the story.
How about you, Janet?
With mine, like I said, it's urban fantasy, but I really wanted to play around with creating a world where there is no magical system. My background is in the sciences as well, and it has always fascinated me when species that we have assumed were extinct, a couple show up now and then, they wash up on a shore, or new species that are discovered as humans push further and further into areas that we haven't been to before. So I set this one in the Southwest. It's in Arizona, but it kind of covers the whole Four Corners region, since that is a very rugged, harsh landscape, and it has a relatively low population density. So I'm kind of playing around with things like, as we mentioned before, dragons. Where did the myth of dragons come from? Well, they came from, bones of dinosaurs, and that's how the culture interpreted it. So I wanted to play with that. And we have, things like chupacabras and wendigos, things like that. And as part of the mystery, all of these creatures that are just, they're animals, that they should react the way animals do. They have, a certain behavior, certain niche in nature, and things are suddenly in upheaval. And the closest that I get to magic in this is that there are vampires, but these are humans that have been infected with a virus that cause genetic mutations. And the vampires are, as we learn in this book, behind a lot of this massing of cryptids against humanity. They were human, now they're not. They're very familiar, so they're humanity's worst threat.
What about you, Len? What really pulled together this big inspiration?
What's that again?
I said, what pulled together this big inspiration?
Well, I'm going to sound a little bit on a repeat, because everybody's taking notes from biology, and I love that, because I've got a background in studying biology, and when it comes to applying that to dark fantasy, I start playing it like it's the movie Prometheus, and say, hey, what can I do to take like weird pieces from this and put it together? So let's have a swamp full of things that are wrong. I wrote a similar piece in a connected story to this that has a spider with a lamprey mouth. So it's like, yeah, let's do things like that. I just wanted to kind of twist and tweak humans in such a way that would make it kind of abhorrent, and at the same time it's like, oh yeah, that's what we already do anyway. But at the same time, even though I'm going to all these mean, nasty, dark places, I also wanted to say, yeah, there's also some hope in the world. Can't promise you happiness, but there's still some hope if you're going to go digging, if you're willing to go digging for it.
Joelle? And you're on mute.
You would think I would know better by now. Sorry. My cat is meowing, so I went on mute so you wouldn't hear him. None of my stuff is rooted in biology at all. There's no scientific background for anything at all. My husband's a scientist, not me. So I draw on a lot of mythology, and I draw a lot on demonology, and you know, for me to get a handle on a story, I really just, I start with character and build everything around character. And for me, the very first book, I couldn't figure out like where to start. Like I needed a foothold. And I keep a list in my phone of all sorts of, you know, funny things or interesting lines or just random thoughts. And when I wanted to write this book, I knew I needed like a foothold in this character. When I wanted to write this series, I just needed something. And I went to my phone, and I had been, when I had been working in an office full time, my team and I had gotten some Chinese food, and I got a fortune cookie like you do. And I opened it up and it said, "No one looks good in skinny jeans." And I was wearing skinny jeans at the time. So I said to my colleague, "I think I was just fat shamed by a fortune cookie." And he laughed, right? So I wrote it down because, you know, you got to hold on to a good laugh line. And so when I was trying to figure out where to start, I was looking through my phone and I saw that. And so I wrote it down. I was fat shamed by a fortune cookie. And her sister says, "Did you eat it and show it who's boss?" And as soon as I had those two first lines, I had my character. Like that was what I needed. I knew her. I knew everything about her really that I needed at that moment. And it was just a matter of sort of building out her life history. And I tried to think like, she's living in a fictional Cleveland, and because I needed the lake, and I live in Cleveland. And I was like, where would be the worst place to put her? This white, nice Jewish girl. I'm going to put her in Chinatown, and she's going to live. I love Chinatown, by the way, but in Cleveland, it's really, really tiny. And she's going to live in an apartment above a takeout Chinese place so it always smells like soy sauce. And like, these were just these little details that I started to get. And then I was able to say, okay, what's the bigger story? What's going on here? She has this skill. What is that skill going to be? But that's really where I needed to start, was like, who is this main character? And when I really was stuck, my publisher said, you know, this sort of thing that people say to each other in writing, "Go take her out to lunch." So I was like, all right, fine. So, you know, I sat down across from Bex at a theoretical, non-existent table. And I said, "Where did you go to school? And what's your favorite color? And how old are you?" And eventually she told me all her secrets.
So taking a look at, you know, kind of how we craft story, you know, and how we pull people into these worlds. And Mark, yours is going to be a little different here again, because you're playing with a collection of poems. But I mean, looking at how you craft the story and craft narrative and bringing this together, you know, I want to know a little bit more about who is it we're going to meet in the stories themselves. So when we look, and so Mark, if we start with yours, who is it we're going to meet through the poems? You know, I mean, we're seeing it through the eyes of children, but a lot of the time children have the most honest of personalities and personas, even because they're still trying to develop. So who are we going to get to meet, you know, in a few of these stories?
If you spend time with kids, if you've ever been a kid, most of you probably were at one point.
I was born old and grumpy. I'm working backwards.
One of the things I'm fascinated in is kids' sense of humor. What kids find funny is a little bit different from what adults find funny. Now, many adults can regress back to their childhood and find funny the things that they thought would have been funny when they were 8. But a lot of adults can't. You know, they say, "Oh, it's just so childish." But what I really was trying to do was get into the mind of a child and how a child would respond to a word that the child does not know, and then how that could result in a humorous turn of events. So each poem is like a little tidbit of a story, but from a child's point of view. And it always plays with words. It plays with language. I love the way kids play with words. I love words. I love how we define words, redefine words, come up with new meanings for words, come up with new pronunciations for words. If you work with kids, they're expert at it. They're better than all you authors because they're so fresh about it. But you have to be listening. So like one of the poems is about, I picked it up, like you were saying, something that you might have overheard or saw in a restaurant. Well, one day I was shopping for a mower. I was actually at Lowe's. Am I allowed to say that?
Sure.
So I was going
as long as
to
they'll sponsor us.
Right. And I was trying to get a mower, and there was a father and about a 5-year-old boy next to me. And the father was talking to somebody at the store and trying to explain what he needed. He said, well, we need to get a new mower. Our mower is just totally out of whack. And so the guy, and then the boy tugged on his father's sleeve and said, Daddy, why don't we just get some whack? And his father looked at it and he said, well, if it's out of whack, we'll just get some whack and then the mower should work, shouldn't it? Well, that makes perfect sense from a kid's point of view. And so I ended up writing a whole poem based on that business I call Gizmo's Gone Bad, where everything's out of whack. But it's all kind of based on the way a kid would look at things, the way a kid would try to define a word and say, I don't know what that means, but it makes sense to me this way. So I had a lot of fun with that, but I was really trying to get into the head of a kid. Just like what you do when you're writing fiction, you're trying to get into the head of your characters. I was just trying to get into the head of kids.
So Glenn, who are we going to get to meet? We started going down that path a little bit, but who are we really going to get to meet in your world as well? And you're on mute.
All right. I'm sorry. So we're really going to get to meet us. These people, as I said before, they're the best of us, they're the worst of us, but they're people. And, you're not going to meet Tyrannosaurus Rex or Velociraptor or Triceratops. These are really people, and they will remind you so much of us that you really see the whole story from their point of view. When I first wrote this, I began the story in the middle. I always titled my my chapters in all of my books, and the chapter kind of gives you a feel for where, what's going to be in that chapter. So it started with the chapter A Rat in a Cage, and our main character is captured. She's analyzed, she's unconscious, she's put in a cage, and they actually put in a dozen rats, recognizing that she is a predator by nature. They're thinking, well, let's feed her. She probably wants live food. Let her catch these rats, within this confined space. Surely she can catch some and eat, and we can learn something about her eating habits. She has no intentions of, this is an aristocrat. This is like a countess, right? She is not going to eat a rat. She's not going to chase it around. She's offended by sharing her space with these things, and she's thinking that these are intelligent creatures and they're related to us. As far as she's concerned, all mammals are the same way we use the term bug for insects, whether they're ants or they're wasps or hornets or bees or even spiders or worms. Any kind of grub, arachnoid, or insect is a bug. And that's the way they look at mammals. If you're a mouse or a bear or a rat or a tiger, you're a jing, you're just a mammal. And she lowers herself to communicate because she's caged, and she realizes that she has to. But it started from there, and it spread both forward and backward. So I went to the end of the story from there, and I went to the beginning of the story from there. But that's where it really started, that chapter. She's the perfect character to tell the story. She is the closest to us in size. She is apparently innocuous. She is adept at speaking our language. She is cagey from the perspective of pumping us for information when we think that we have the upper hand. I think that the character that she reminds me the most of is maybe the Black Widow. If you remember in the Avengers, she's tied up in a chair, hanging over the edge. They think they're torturing her for information, and she says, "This jerk is about to give me everything." And they're looking at each other. It's like, we weren't going to give her everything. And she says, "Well, get her out of there right now." And she escapes, as if, it's just a matter of course. And she takes her high heels and she walks out after beating everybody's butt. This is what she was like.
So Alex, let's find out a little bit more about who all we're going to meet in your world.
Sure. I mean, we talked a little bit about Carmen, who's the protagonist, and she's, I think, personality-wise, she's very driven and focused. She's in stark contrast to my last series character, who was a recovering alcoholic and really was about overcoming his problems. From page one, Carmen's got everything together. She's very focused and very driven, and she knows what she wants, and she's going to do what she needs to do to get to that goal. Her boss is another main character. Jeffrey Carlisle is, he's a blowhard. He's just one of these guys that I think one of the ways I describe his shelf is, dusty books he's never pulled off to read. We were talking about bookshelves earlier, but he's got literary aspirations and sees comics as just his drudgery that he's doing until he can get to write the great American novel or do some serious literary work. But he's also got a heart. I think one of the main things I wanted to avoid was just making each character an archetype or a comic book archetype that was easily recognizable. I wanted them to feel familiar, but also be different enough to feel unique. Doug Detmer is the artist that works on the comic strip and on the comic. He actually figures out that it's Carmen who's writing it because he knows Carmen's the one giving all the notes. When Carlisle sends him notes on scripts or art, he tells her, well, the notes are too smart for Jeff. So I knew they were coming from somebody else. But he's a difficult personality. He's got his own demons he's dealing with. He's a talented artist, but he's also curmudgeonly and very defiant. He if something goes away, he doesn't want it to go, he'll quit. He's a little bit of the difficult artist, but also more nuanced than that. And then of course there's Harvey, who's Carmen's colleague, and at first he seems really innocent and wide-eyed, and then he approaches her about this idea, and you think, oh, okay, well, why would he be lying? And as the mystery unfurls, you realize that there was more to him and more to why he asked Carmen and why he proposed it the way he did, where she would do it anonymously and he could then take the credit than we're first led on to believe. So those are kind of like the key players.
Janet, how about you? Who are we going to meet? Who are we going to dive into the heads of?
With this, I really wanted to take the trope of, some sketchy, shadowy government organization and flip it. I mean, we've all seen that and it's fun, but let's go someplace else. So the members of this organization, the members of this team, they have been raised together since they were children. That's when teams are formed, and their instructors were very caring, and they looked at their strengths and weaknesses and placed them in specialties that could use them. So instead of being very grim and tortured, them against this unstoppable force, they love their job. They think they have the coolest career, the coolest life in the world, and they feel very sorry for civilians who don't have this. So the first two books were about the commander, who was very much a wild card off the book, thinking outside of the box, and she ends up bringing in someone who is basically like a American Gordon Ramsay. He is, celebrity, well-known, very flamboyant, and now he has to fit in with this secretive organization where the members are not supposed to be memorable. And in this book, the third book, we went in the exact opposite direction. Liv, the heroine, is very much a rules, order, rules shape your world, but suddenly the rules don't apply. Cryptids are acting off, maybe she can't trust her own organization. And the civilian that she saves early on, she learns that perhaps civilians do have something to add and that it's time for a collaboration.
So, Len, how about you? Who do we get to meet? Who we're going to be bouncing around with in the story?
Well, the point of view is always Serena, the cursed witch, but she's there's flashbacks and there's the current time too, and in both there's always two others that are hanging out with her. In the flashbacks, there are the two other witches that she was hanging out with much earlier on, especially in the time when she got cursed. That's actually a scene in the story. But in the more current action, she encounters a swordsman who is also been cursed in the same way. He's been trapped in a pit, much like she is briefly. And then there's also a village priest who's not cursed at all, and so if he dies, he's done. He's out, and that character actually has to go from being very antagonistic toward anybody who's cursed to being an ally and actually then fighting for them and with them. So it's I try to actually have progression in every character. My motto is there's no villains and there's no heroes. Everybody's the hero of their own story. I stole a quote from Stephen King, but I like it. So yeah, there's a fun quest through swamps and hills and desolate plains and bleeding walls, and they're kind of alive. And we get to meet these people along the way who are fighters and witches trying to save the world, and they're also trying to endure kind of mean world at the same time.
Joelle?
Well, obviously you meet Vex, main character, and her sister Michaela, Mickey, and Mickey's husband Jonah, who doesn't like Vex at all, and Vex's boss, who is about 4 feet tall and very hairy because she's half gnome, and and then Gregory Adamos, and who is like a Greek mobster, and he's really just incredibly self-absorbed himself. Everything revolves around him, and he's sort of violent and mean in some ways, and not very caring. And then of course Asher, who is her sexy and very mysterious upstairs neighbor. And then my favorite character, and Jim knows this because we've talked about it before, is my 6 foot tall pink fairy named Pinky. And when we first meet him, he's sitting at the bar, totally dejected. His wings are like hanging. He's just so sad. And he's drinking like a thimble of honey meat. And he can get completely sloshed on that. So yeah, he's my favorite character. And then there's there's a retinue of bad guys from hell, and a warlock who she used to go to high school with.
Those high school bullies.
Well, and she says, and it's really hard when you're the warlock who's trying to kill you wrote in your high school yearbook, we won't forget the magic. So just thank you, Len. I mean, it's my favorite thing. But I think I really tried really hard to make sure that I was having those kind of fun moments in it. It is a gritty urban fantasy, but she spends some time scanning the books, for example, at a library, and it's a special library. And I had so much fun creating the titles of those magical books. And one of them is Demonologica Pro Imbecilibus. And that is Latin for demons for dummies. And I really went so far to make sure that that was correct, and contacted a classics professor at Ohio University who got really excited about figuring that out and made sure that I had the right declination. So there's, little details like that.
Isabelle?
We start off with Juliet, Mariana Fontaine, who is an Afro-Latina witch, and she's half destroyer witch and half healer witch. And even though she's a telenovela actress, she's super uber awkward. So book one starts off with her behind Victor, and she's looking at the sweat behind trailing down his neck. And then at one point when he, lifts his shirt up to wipe his face, she says, "Have you been working out?" And then it's just very awkward. But their relationship develops. There are, so magic takes a second, like basically the passenger seat to the relationships. That's what I really wanted to focus on. So for that, the characters are the most important thing, not the magic and the glowing, which I love, but I really wanted readers to just have something chunky to chew on. So we have Migdalia, Victor's mother, who's an important character in book one, but also in book two. And she is a fierce destroyer witch who's extremely protective of her son. And with that, she makes some epic decisions with long-lasting consequences. But Juliet has to kind of make peace with her and bond. We have Fabienne as well, who's a new witch, layered character. You want to love her, you want to hate her, but so much is revealed about her that at the end of the story, I want readers to want her back because she's actually going to be potentially coming back in the last book. And we have Alec, who's a gorgeous best friend of Juliet's, who has his own demons, and some things revealed in this book that set him off. We have Clarissa, who is Victor's promised witch, and some things happen here. But I wanted all of the characters to have layers because it's much more fun to write that way, and it's obviously much more fun to read. So I hope readers enjoy this book.
So the one fun thing that's always comes up is the big question. What's the one thing that surprised you when you were putting this together? What was the one thing you learned out of it? What was the one thing that, you're not going to forget no matter what else you do, no matter what else you write? What's that one big kind of shocker that came across when you were working on this? So Glenn, we're going to start with you on that one. And you're on mute.
I've never been accused of being quiet so many times in one session.
Especially by me.
Especially by you. So I don't know if you can see this. So, and it's probably backwards for you guys. So this is Dragon's Air, comes out tomorrow. May the 4th be with you. And if you go to my website, you'll see the cover art, which is spectacular on this. But this is one of these situations where I came up with this one main character, and I built all these other characters around her. They're great contrast characters. There's Tur, who is the exact opposite of Vitna. He is large, he is powerful, he's a man of few words, he's virtually invincible on a personal level. He's got the strategic mind of Captain America, and he's got the attitude of Batman. And his only weakness is Vitna, who gets captured by the US military. There's Botep, who for all the world comes across as a thug, but he's actually one of the most apt and adaptable of all the crew. He's powerful, he's fearless, doesn't back down, even though he's not as powerful as Tur. There's the wise old Carhome, who is equally powerful. He's wizened. There's Weif, who's confident. She's a 30-foot avian who gets into a dogfight with a couple of jet fighters, but she's unarmed and has to outfly them since you can't outfight them. And then the mysterious children of a man named Dragon, who is basically the father of all the images of dragon that we know. All of them have different personalities. They have different agendas. It's not a comedy, but there is certainly a wry sense of humor between them. And their interactions with human beings is also, it's understandable, but it's unexpected. And I had a great time creating all these different characters and their backstories, their personalities, and their diversity. And pointing out that in spite of their diversity, 400 different species that have figured out how to live together for over 65 million years cannot stand the concept of mammals joining their ranks, even if they've evolved on the same world that the Iflu have evolved on, and by all the rules must be invited to join. And it is like a nightmare come true for them.
So Alex, how about you? What did you learn from the experiences you were going through? You know, what surprised you in all the things that came out when you were developing this? What's the one big thing that jumps out at you?
I mean, I love just learning about an industry that I'm familiar with in terms of today, but what it was like back then in terms of just the production cycle of a comic, just the procedures to get a book out. But I also was really surprised by some of the characters. I'm an outliner, so I plan out my books with some detail, but I leave enough room so that if a character does something on their own, I can follow them around. But I had a character show up. She shows up early on as kind of an oracle of sorts. She kind of hints that something is wrong and that Carmen should keep her eyes peeled. And I thought that would be that. It was just like a noir trope that she would show up and kind of hint at menace. But she kept showing up and she kept becoming, you know, a more frequent guest, I guess. And then by the end of the book, she was really integral, without spoiling anything, really integral to the solution of the whole story. So those are always pleasant surprises when the characters kind of jump out and start acting on their own and you're really just like chasing them around with a notebook. So
Janet, how about you? What was that big shocker?
It's actually similar to Alex's. I usually plot things out in detail, you know, like terrible 30-page, you know, outlines per story. And with this one, I knew that the hero, the civilian that would be joining the team, had some anxiety issues. And as I started writing him, you know, it just came out that he was also neurodivergent. And, you know, of course, he had been treated a certain way. People weren't comfortable with him or didn't understand him in the civilian world. And he comes into this new one that does not at all have the same social structures and hangups. And he's shown how he can fit in to a world and really appreciate what civilians see as a problem, something that needs to be changed. He is able to embrace it. This is what makes him who he is. He's found a place where, you know, not only does it come in handy, it's a necessity.
How about you, Len? What was that big moment when you were going through and putting this one together that jumped at you? What was the big thing you learned from the exercise?
Well, I usually am one who always gets ambushed by a character saying, yeah, I'm going to do this. But this time around, I was playing with the past version of the story, you know, because I wanted to always have a few scenes of, you know, what was going on in Serena's past that kind of echo what was going on in that immediate present. And I built up the origin of how she got cursed, and I had a half of a book to go through. So I'm like, well, what's going to happen here? So now I actually had the plot surprise me, even though I kind of outlined it out. And I even culminated with this one scene where Serena and her pals are on a mission, and they're in they're on this deep dark cave, and they're fighting horrible things from the depths of darkness, and they're like, man, how are we ever going to get out of here? And then like 30 of their buddies just come shooting down from the ceiling and blasting everything in magic. I was like, oh, that's really cool. So that was my big surprise in that. So I learned that this plot could surprise me.
JD, what was your big surprise, your that learning moment as you were cranking through to get to round out the trilogy?
Well, I really have to answer that the big surprise came at the very, very beginning, because I wrote the first 3 chapters of the book and a synopsis and sent it off to the publisher along with like this one line, like book 2 will be this and book 3 will be this. And I gave those lines zero thought. Like I was just like, if you're going to pitch one book, pitch 3, and here's what it is. And the publisher came back with book 2 is your book 1, and everything you wrote for those first 3 chapters is backstory that you need to know but doesn't belong in the book. And it was some of the best advice I've ever gotten. Len's like, what? Like, what? And it was great advice. It was great advice because I went into it knowing so much more about the character than you do. So when you meet her, like this bad thing has already happened and she's now reacting to it. And so it sort of starts right there. And then I did take those first 3 chapters and I turned them into a short story that I give away on my website. So for people who like have read the book and are like, wait, I want to know how that bad thing happened, they can go read it. And that's fun, I think, to be able to do that as a writer. But that was the big surprise. Like I really did not see that coming. I did not expect that when I got the responses back, and it turned out to be fantastic advice.
Isabelle, what about you? What was that big surprise moment?
One scene that just came up, regardless of the outline, but it just developed. And although this one character was Juliet's nemesis in book 1, she sits down and has ice cream with them in book 2, which is a very interesting scene. And she ends up even commenting, going, you nearly blinded me, and almost killed my aunt, but here I am having ice cream with you. But it was a fun moment. And that same bad evil witch, or destroyer witch, let's say, is actually opening up a bookshop in Bellefleur. So that also popped up. So we'll be having a bookshop. It just happened, but it's just these moments that you honor and you just write and share with the readers, because it's a special moment. I'm also a visual artist. So it happens when you're on the canvas as well, when you're trying to maybe, you think that you got blue on the brush and you realize it's actually green. I'll go with it. And it turns out beautiful. I think I love the process. Thanks for asking that question.
Mark, how about you? Out of whether it comes from learning more about Theodore Roosevelt's library or the accidental book, what was your big shocker?
I will go with the Theodore Roosevelt book. Those of us in the know about Theodore Roosevelt, we always call him TR. So one of the chapters, the first substantial chapter in my book, is an overview of Theodore Roosevelt's life as a reader. From his early childhood right up to the very end of his life. He read every day just about. But we all have these images of Roosevelt, the Rough Rider, the strenuous life, the man on testosterone, the big game hunter, all of that sort of stuff. Image we all have of TR. When I started to really delve into his world as a reader, there's a whole nother side to TR that's really much more interesting to me than that Rough Rider, machismo sort of stuff. So, for example, I found out that he loves one of my favorite authors, or he loved one of my favorite authors, and that is Kenneth Grahame and The Wind in the Willows, and how much he loved The Wind in the Willows, and how after he served as president, and he went on a safari in Africa, when he came back, before he came back to the States, he went to England to visit Kenneth Grahame. The two corresponded rather regularly. This gentler, quieter, contemplative, imaginative, fun-loving sort of reader of children's fantasy. There has never been a president that cared more about children's literature than Theodore Roosevelt. That's how I became interested in Theodore Roosevelt, was because he was so interested in children's literature. But the more I delved into that, the more I thought, boy, we could have had some great talks He knew a tremendous amount about Lewis Carroll. He knew a tremendous amount about Kipling. He knew a tremendous amount about Kenneth Graham. He knew a tremendous amount about Joel Chandler Harris. He was a great expert on fairy tales, children's poetry. He knew a tremendous amount about children's poetry. We quoted at cabinet meetings. He would quote Lewis Carroll poems, and was always offended when all of his members of his cabinet would not have the faintest idea that he was quoting a Lewis Carroll poem. That side of TR is so interesting, and I really loved getting to know that side of TR. And I hope that if people read the book, they will find out that TR is not just a cartoon machismo person. He was a great intellect. He was a great reader, and a much more complex person than you generally see when you see little TV shows about him. I really have grown to, I don't always agree with everything that he did, but boy, he was a reader. Think of presidents. Can you imagine a president who read a book every single day? It was just amazing how much that man read, how knowledgeable he was. And so that gentle side of TR, or the more contemplative side of TR, I really enjoyed getting to know that side of him.
Well, it's been a fun night of stacking up that to be read pile for everyone. But before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys and where to find these books. And because I can, and there's no adults in the room, I'm going to go backwards. So Janet, where can we find you? Website, social media, and let everybody know where to find that new book.
You can find me at my website, janetwaldenwest.com. And you can also pick up the prequel novella for the Region 2 series. And I am everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and it is all under Janet Walden-West.
Alex?
You can find me at alexsegura.com. I'm pretty active on Twitter at @Alex_Segura, and on Instagram, at Alex Segura Jr.
Glenn?
You can find me on glennparris.com. And remember, Glenn with 2 N's, Parris with 2 R's, because why? I'm double trouble. Outland Entertainment is my publisher. And you can find me, of course, on Amazon, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're doing a Facebook Live from the Vibrary. That's library with a V, the Vibrary, in Stone Mountain, Georgia, 970 Main Street, Stone Mountain Village. It's going to be from 7 to 10. We're going to have some giveaways. There'll be t-shirts, there will be mugs, there will be water bottles, there will be movie tickets given away. Hopefully people will see Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and some of the other movies to come out. And we're going to have a conversation about fear, about the human condition, and about 65 million year old curses like Nuck. And that was my use of the F-bomb, but from 65 million years ago. So have at it.
Mark?
Well, you really can't find me anywhere. But when they invented the word Luddite, it was just a little bit, I was just a little bit after that. But I do have a blog, and the blog isn't about me. The blog is about Charlotte, and it's called Storied Charlotte. And it comes out every single week. And in Storied Charlotte, I celebrate Charlotte's community of readers and writers. I much more enjoy promoting other people than promoting myself. And so in fact, one of the people I promoted was Jim, sitting right there in my
with the
Hollywood
Krampus, yes, with the Krampus story.
That's right. So it's a lot more fun for me to promote other. I'm really not that comfortable promoting myself, but I do like to promote. I know authors have to. I mean, you have no choice. It's not because you're narcissistic or anything. You have to promote yourself. But I enjoy promoting other authors, and so every week I find some writer in Charlotte and tell you something about that writer in Charlotte that you wouldn't know. I generally don't focus on the really, really big names in Charlotte writers, but the quieter names that you might not normally come across. So all you need to do is type in Storied Charlotte, and it pops right up. So, and I do it every single week.
And I've never been accused of being quiet. Isabelle, how about you? Where do we find you?
You can find me at isabellehardesty.com. I'm on Instagram at I am Isabelle Hardesty, and you can find my books Amazon, Kobo, Barnes & Noble. I'm on Twitter too, Facebook, but you can find all that on my website, isabellehardesty.com.
JD Blackrose.
Well, you can find me on my blog at slipperywords.com. If you happen to type in jdblackrose.com, it doesn't matter because that will take you to the same exact place. And I am everywhere as JD Blackrose, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. And if you do follow me, if you want to follow me on TikTok or go to YouTube to Slippery Words, put in hashtag Real Talk Writer. If you are a beginning writer and you're looking for straight talk about what it's like, that's something I started fairly recently with little videos around that.
And Len.
You can find me really easily at len-berry.com. I've got Amazon, I've got Twitter, I've got Facebook, I've got Instagram. I've got Patreon even. I mean, a lot of people have that too, but len-berry.com will bring you straight to me. I've got a links page. I've got a bunch of little things that I wrote up over several months, just me musing about the world or anime or what have it. I need to post something there very soon. Been doing more newsletters lately. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
And I've had the pleasure of herding these chickens. I am Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, speculativefictionacademy.com, and of course, here at ConTinual. And we will see you guys again soon. Talk to you now.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye. Good to meet everybody.